All right, thank you all. Please take your seats. We're gonna start our session. Carrot and stick, or managing recycling through local and state legislative process. So as many of you know, California, which is already has some of the most broad-reaching product stewardships and extended producer responsibility laws in the United States governing products such as paints, carpets, and mattress recycling. We also have pharmaceutical waste. Recently passed comprehensive legislations aimed at reducing plastic pollution. The Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act, or as we like to call it, SB 54, which was signed into law on June 30 of 2022, would require plastic makers to foot the bill for recycling and restricts single-use plastics. We thought today it would be appropriate to provide you with an overview of the process that led to this successful passage of this landmark legislation, and also help you think through what parts of the strategies you're going to be hearing about today and the goals of SB 54 that put forward might be workable back home in your state. So we've got with us today two people who were instrumental in passing SB 54. First, we're going to hear from Heidi Sanborn. And if you don't know Heidi, you would know after this presentation. Heidi is the founding director of the National Stewardship Action Council. She has over 30 years experience as a leader in the solid waste industry. Heidi is one of the nation's foremost experts on producer responsibility and product stewardship. Our next speaker is the California State Senator, the Honorable Ben Allen. Senator Allen was elected in 2014 and re-elected in 2018 to represent the 26th Senate District, the same district where he grew up and whose public school he attended. His district covers West Side, Hollywood, and the coastal South Bay area community of the Los Angeles County. That's the beach cities for us who live here. As a legislative leader in the environmental protection effort, Senator Ben Allen continued to pursue ambitious policies that address the plastic pollution crisis. He has also worked to bolster the state climate resiliency by proposing a measure to invest in preparation for extreme weather and other climate-related events, such as like wildfires, floods, and mudslides. Among other things, the committee he chairs, the Senate Environmental Quality Committee, is tasked with overseeing the state aggressive climate goals. Our third speaker was supposed to be Dylan D. Thomas from the Recycling Partnership, who had really wanted to be with us today. Unfortunately, due to an injury, he was not able to join us. So we wish him a speedy recovery. So now I would like to yield the floor to Heidi to take us through the journey that led to SB 54 becoming a law. Heidi.
Thank you so much, Alex. Good afternoon. So great to be here to talk to all of you about what is happening in extended producer responsibility here in California and the nation. I've got Dylan who's listening. He had a little bit of a neck cramp, so he's at home, but he's listening. So if I look at my phone, it's because he's texting me something that I should be saying for his slides. So we'll start with him. First, the three of us again have been introduced, but what is EPR? It's extending the responsibility beyond the sale of the product for the producers who make them. So they have to think life cycle, and they internalize that cost is a cost of doing business. And I will explain in a future slide why that's so important. An extended producer responsibility is a policy approach that's been used widely around the world for a very long time, but it's really late coming to the US as an industrialized country. So this has been like 20 years of work for me, since literally 2002, when I left the state as advisor to the chair of the Waste Board, I've been advocating to get local governments educated about what this meant to them, that they were going to be the greatest beneficiaries, as would be the environment and the consumer, because they're putting products on the market that you can't do anything with and externalizing all the costs onto the public and the public health and the environmental health. And we need to stop that. And the only way to stop that is to make them pay and internalize those costs. So I'm proud to say, thanks to this year's successful legislative session, we now have more EPR laws here in California than in any of the other state. We finally surpassed Maine, who was doing a great job, and we were going back and forth. So we now have 4 states that, and I think Kate had talked a little bit about Colorado and all the hard work she had passing it in Colorado. We have 4 states with EPR bills for packaging. That's it started with Maine, then Oregon, then Colorado, and then California. And ours was signed by our governor on June 30th at 5 p.m. And we have 17 bills that were introduced in 2022. So this is a huge difference than where we were just a few years ago. And you can see that EPR for printed paper and packaging in 2000, there wasn't that much around the world, mostly Europe and Canada. But now in 2020, look at that. I mean, all of Russia, Brazil, many other countries around the world, South Africa, Australia, and more. So these are the 4 states, again, that have EPR for printed paper and packaging: Colorado, California, Maine, and Oregon. And what Dylan did was he broke it out by the different scopes and different things. So I'm going to go through this quickly. But the scope means, does the producer pay, for example, to find the markets and do all the material in motion stuff? And the answer in California is there's improvements to that, but they're not doing all of it. The haulers were protected in this bill, and I'll talk about that. In Colorado, they're doing 100% of the moving of the material. Maine, they call full in the law, which is kind of like 100%. And then Oregon, again, improvements. Approximately 28% of the costs will be covered by the producers. So isn't this interesting? So we're evolving to have a patchwork of rules because we didn't have agreements nationally about how this should look. And the bills started just happening. And I think the pressure was building. We had to do something. We had too much stuff coming at us, and we need the producers to take responsibility. So now we have a bit of a testing ground here of how these all will work. The producer authority in California, there's really no authority for them to control all things in the system. That's unusual. And that's because we have a huge infrastructure in California. The haulers have been here a long time in the municipalities building that infrastructure. We did not want to make sure, we wanted to make sure that was protected, and the producers could not, what I call, roll them, and just kind of start bossing everybody around. So they have to negotiate and cut a deal. If they want improvements in a MRF, great. You can make them an offer to pay for that equipment. You can negotiate with them and have a contract. But if you can't work it out, it can go to mediation. But it's not going to be that they can just tell you what to do. In Colorado, they have a high level of producer authority. In Maine, they have none. The government has pretty much all the authority. And in Oregon, it's low. So you can see these are very different models just in those first 2 criteria. On commercial waste, California, we included everything. It does include commercial waste, but because to me, it's a material. It doesn't matter where it ends up, just get it back. But in Colorado, they've got, yes, they're including commercial. Maine, no. Oregon, yes. So why did Maine exclude it? I'm not exactly sure. It could have been political, but a very different model. Multiple producer-run organizations. That means, do you have one producer-run nonprofit that runs the program, or do you have multiple competing programs? And the answer is, in California, we're going to have one for the first 7 years, and after 8 years, they can split, but the state has to approve it, and under certain conditions. Colorado, no, they are not going to have multiple PROs, neither in Maine. Oregon, yes, but they have to have a minimum of 10% of the market share. So again, I could go through all these. I'll just give you the slides, but these are very different bills. And I just wanted to highlight that, or actually Dylan did, doing it for Dylan. And in general, this is a graph generally that shows about how an EPR program would work. But again, it's very general because what we just saw was they're very different, the first 4 that passed. So the brand owners would pay into the producer responsibility nonprofit organization, at least it's required to be a nonprofit 501c3 in California for public benefit. And then they would give money to MRFs, processors and end markets, and to local governments and recycling service providers. But again, this is just a model. And the government always does the oversight, accountability, transparency, enforcement of the system. So now I'll put my hat back on. Dylan, is there anything you wanted me to know? Then just go ahead and text me. But so I've founded the National Stewardship Action Council. I also founded the California Product Stewardship Council and started that back in 2006-07. And that was to really just start educating mostly local governments and elected officials about what EPR was. Nobody knew what it was. One person said, "Is that CPR?" And I'm like, "No, it's EPR. It's not having a heart attack." But literally nobody knew what we were talking about. And it took, literally, I passed 140 resolutions in the state of California with different elected officials and communities to get them to understand what it was and to delegate authority to their staff to support the bills when they came up. Because local government is slow typically in responding to legislation, and it hurts us. So we needed them to move faster than the opposition was in the lobbying. So we had them adopt resolutions that said, under this rubric, the staff can go ahead and move and write letters ahead of us because we've already given them authority to do it. And so I'm going to talk about how we use local and state policy to catalyze the shift to a circular and equitable economy. And I formed NSOC 7 years ago. I've been speaking around the world for a long time. I've been to Belgium and spoke at EPR conferences for packaging, for e-waste, all kinds of things. And what I did understand from those trips is that we're isolated in the US. Our companies that operate here and sell here, even are based here, sell into Europe and sell into other systems, and they were already being responsible for the take back of their program, their products. And it was frustrating to me because I kept, running into lobbyists. We can't do it. The sky will fall, everything will be horrible. But in fact, they were already doing it. And I started asking their counterparts, why is it that we have all this fighting in the US? And they would say to me, well, the US side of the house doesn't listen to us about anything, let alone EPR. So you're kind of the Wild West. So that's what I learned. We had to do the education and do the hard work here. Now, to get to a circular and equitable economy is going to be hard because we spent the last 120 years messing up a circular system. Nature is a circular system. Everything in it is the waste product from one system is the feedstock for the next. And what we did is interrupt that and create waste. Waste is a man-made thing or a people-made thing. So to get back to a circular economy, which is what nature is, we have to go through these 3 things. I truly believe in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation definition, which is first, design out waste and pollution, then keep materials in use and in motion, which is recycling and organics composting, and regenerate natural systems that you've already harmed. And the only bill I know of in the entire world that does all 3 things is SB 54. And that's why this is so unique, that we're literally going to get to the place where we can decouple economic activity and population growth from resource consumption. So I'm going to say quickly the definition between EPR and product stewardship, because you'll hear that thrown around a lot too. So to me, product stewardship is voluntary. It could be mandatory, but it's mostly use of a visible fee and giving public money to a private organization, privately run nonprofit, run by the manufacturers. I personally don't like the model. I think it's dangerous. I don't like giving public money to any company to run with. I think that if we're going to have public money given to anybody, it should be the government with all the controls on it. EPR, the way I look at it, is it's internalized cost of doing business. The business literally has to put this on their bottom line. They have to share it with their shareholders, what this expense line is for recycling and take back. And that means that the shareholders start beating them up on getting that cost down. And how do they get the cost down? They make it more durable. They make it less toxic. They make it so you can repair it and recycle it and dismantle it. That's what we don't have now on so much. So why we're getting things that we can't do anything with. So that's how I differentiate this. And you'll see product stewardship to me, again, is like the visible fee for paint, for mattresses, but we internalize the costs on thermostats in the state and on pharmaceuticals and needles, and now packaging and batteries. We just did batteries too. So what can local governments do? Well, when we were running up against big pharma and trying to get them to take back their unused medications that were getting flushed or left in the home and causing drug addiction, they said, no, it's not our job. It's not our job. We're not gonna support this bill. Okay, fine. So I thought, well, we gotta outwit them. We can't outrun them with money. So we'll have to start county by county and doing ordinances. So we started with Alameda County, and we passed the first EPR ordinance on medicines in the US in 2012. And pharma threatened to sue Alameda and promptly made good on that promise. So there was a lawsuit that went all the way to the US Supreme Court, and they denied hearing it, which meant the two lower courts rulings stood, that there was no violation of the Commerce Clause, and any local government in this country, if they feel that there's a public health and safety reason, they can protect public health and safety. That is their job, and they can impose producer responsibility on those products. I used to think that didn't mean packaging, that there was no health and safety impact on packaging. But with the latest studies that we're finding plastics in breast milk, in our bodies, in our livers, I think that's changing quickly. And I wouldn't doubt a bit if that would challenge, if somebody did want to do EPR at a local level on packaging, they could do it. It would be challenging to do, but they could do it. So we got 12 ordinances passed all the way through the Bay Area and down to Santa Barbara, with only one county supervisor out of 12 counties voting no. And we finally were going for LA, and we had 6 hearings. And by the final hearing, the wall of lobbyists I call the Italian suit brigade in the back of the room came and said, fine, let's start talking about a state bill, because we don't want all these different rules in all these different counties, because they could see they were not winning. And that's how we got a really good state bill. We passed that bill, pharmaceutical EPR, paying for government oversight and the whole kit and caboodle for the whole state of California, 39-0 bipartisan vote off the Senate floor. Unprecedented. Everybody told me we couldn't do it. So we're the little, train that could. Every time somebody tells me no, it's like, nope, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And we did. So that was us celebrating when we got the vote. And we've had lots of legislative successes on EPR since then and other things. But SB 212 on medicines and sharps, that's the first in the country to be both medicines and sharps. Nobody else has done that since. So it's literally rolling out now. If you go into a pharmacy, you're starting to see pharmaceutical bins and needle take back programs right there, and every pharmacy that asks for them can get them within 90 days. We wrote that into the law. So there's very convenient for the public. We also passed cleanup bills on carpet, the first eco-modulated fee in the US on the carpet bill. We also passed the first EPR bill that expands reuse of household hazardous waste. And again, an eco-modulated fee, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but basically the producers are going to charge, and we have this in the packaging bill, that the producers are going to charge the producer-run organization is going to charge a company more if that product is less recyclable, a contaminant, has dyes and inks that are causing problems with the market. So that's what we call eco-modulated fee. You're going to pay a lot more per ton to sell your product on the market if it's causing problems in the system. That's the financial language that businesses understand. So if it's going to cost them more, they're going to try and get that down, and that's when they do better design. So now we have ag pesticide containers was passed in 08 in California. Recalled products. I don't know if you remember this, Alex, but we had like 55,000 lead-based paint lunchboxes on the market, and they were all getting returned to hazardous waste facilities. And we said, hey, we shouldn't pay for this. They weren't even supposed to be sold. So now we can make the recalled products, manufacturers take them all back. Mercury thermostats, which, by the way, we just updated that bill, and now we have a $30 cash bounty that is implemented in California. If you bring back a mercury thermostat, we'll give you $30 right there. So we did that to make sure we get them all back. The paint program in 2010, carpet, those were both visible fees, as was mattresses. but I finally got back to what I wanted, which was internalized costs on meds and sharps. And then we just passed loose battery EPR internalized costs here in California this year, and the big kahuna packaging. We also passed the bill, just so you know, I sponsored a bill, AB 2208, to prevent the sale of mercury containing lighting. We don't need them anymore. We've got LEDs. They last twice as long. They're more energy efficient, and they have no mercury to cause you a bunch of problems at the back end or contaminate staff when they break, because they do break. But I want to mention that Senator Allen and I have been on 4 trips now. I'm on the board of the California Foundation for the Environment and the Economy. And when I joined the board, I said, look, we need to start taking legislators on study trips to other countries to see how these programs work. Because I've seen it, I know what it did for my thinking. I'd really like to take them on the trips too. And so Senator Allen's been on all 4, along with our State Treasurer Fiona Ma, and I know Wendy's been there with us, Wendy and Suzanne and others probably here in the room, but that is very important. We take about groups of 20, and we've done it 4 times now, to Canada, Oregon, Washington, Maine. We went to Maine this year because we wanted to talk about the packaging bill. It changes minds and it builds relationships so that when we come back, we literally text each other. Like they're all texting now, right now, because he and I are on the stage and they're going, hey, and Treasurer Ma was here yesterday and she did the keynote. It was awesome. But that helped us move the needle. That's us in Vancouver, Canada at Merlin Plastics, where they have packaging EPR and they've had it for 4 or 5 years now. Another thing we did here in California that we started was truth in labeling. This whole thing, we can't fix the system if everything we tell the public on the label is a lie. So they buy things and think they're flushable, and then they flush them. That makes sense, right? Except it's plastic and it's not flushable, and they should never have been labeled flushable. And then they have a sanitation backup in their house in the middle of COVID, and they're very upset. So we passed a bill, we negotiated with Kimberly-Clark, et cetera, and now they can't label them as flushable, and they have to have a moniker, do not flush. But this shows you the power and why I formed the National Stewardship Action Council, to take what we do in California and make it national quickly, because we're 12% of the market. So what we do drives behavior of manufacturers. And now we have not just the Wipes Act here in California, but it's now introduced as a bipartisan bill in Congress. We'd love your help passing it. And that is HR 4602. So if you can help us with that, please do let us know. But just to show you, there was a lot of people involved passing the packaging bill. I'll let the senator be able to tell you all about it. But we got a 29-0 vote off the Senate floor, a 2/3 vote on the hardest thing we'll ever do in this industry. And then 67-2 bipartisan in the assembly. And we did that in one 24-hour period, put it on the governor's desk, had 3 people sign a ballot measure to be pulled off the ballot, and got the governor to sign it in 24 hours. Thank you. I really hope they do a movie about it, because it was quite dramatic and very fun to watch. I'm sure it would be. But that was all of us working together in the Capitol, and that's who we are. And we work nationally. I'd love to help you wherever you are working on your issues and your waste management EPR program. But now we're going to turn it over to Senator Ben Allen, who is our legislative champion of a circular economy here in California. Senator Allen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heidi. What a great champion and leader you've been internationally on this topic. And I love your enthusiasm for the issue. I share it. It's infectious. I'm not sure the general public's going to buy tickets to the movie about the passage of SB 54, but maybe the people here will. We can make it like a niche. You know, we could set up our own waste management film festival network that might get together every 5 years and pass out, audience awards. Anyway, this is a wonderful chance to sit down and talk a little bit with some practitioners from the field. And I know we got folks who are tuned in from different parts of the country who care about this issue, but I do want to reiterate my deep thanks to Heidi and Jordan on your team and all the folks in the National Stewardship Action Council. Also Dylan, who's I know listening in, a wonderful guy, a great partner of ours from the Recycling Partnership, and their expertise was so essential to getting this policy right. So here we go. Let's advance the slides. This really was. I'm going to talk specifically about SB 54. We've heard about some of the parameters of EPR versus product stewardship and a lot of the history. This particular bill was the product of a 4 or 5 year effort that really, I think, got going with China sword. We all, I think most folks here probably know that the national sword policy was put in place in 2017, and it was designed to stop the country from taking on plastic waste from other countries, especially the United States. And at the end of the day, we were to some extent living a lie. We kept sending our junk to them, and so much of it was ended up incinerated in their own waterways. It was actually becoming a very serious environmental disaster. And so we had to suddenly figure out a way to deal with the fact that we could no longer send our recycling material off to China. And we really realized pretty quickly how much we lacked a significant sufficient recycling infrastructure. And of course, we all had more plastic waste piling up than ever before. There's so much more plastic making its way through the system than in the past. And we were seeing dramatically increased costs to local governments, which is where you all come in. Just the basic work of handling that extra material was becoming a crisis. It was eating into funds for everything from first responders to parks. Your elected officials, your mayors, your city councils were faced with increasingly difficult choices about raising people's rates. And it was really clear to us, I think, that just these one-off feel-good bills like banning plastic bags or straws, which were good bills, I supported them, but they really did not hit the key problem, which was that we needed a much more comprehensive solution to this crisis. We needed a larger framework. And so we first introduced the bill back in 2018, when life was so much simpler. And the goal sought to I'm not sure life was simpler in 2018, but it does continue to get more complicated. But the idea was that we were looking for a more comprehensive framework. And after 4 years of very intense, 4 or 5 years of intense negotiating with stakeholders, the introduction of a citizen-led ballot measure, several iterations of our policy, lots and lots of negotiation, the bill died many, many times. We finally got the bill across the finish line in June, as you saw. So let me tell you a little bit about, and it was really something we were so proud of. I mean, it was but this shows you a little bit about how close we came over and over and over again. I mean, achingly close to getting the bill passed, and we finally got there. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly the bill does. First of all, the bill deals with all single-use packaging. It's material neutral, so it's not just having to do with plastic. That was a controversial issue. A lot of the other materials did not want to be included in the bill. But in the end of the day, it was very important to our city partners and the folks in the waste hauling industry as well, just from a logistics perspective, for all materials to be included under the bill. But we certainly have much tighter rules and restrictions related to plastics within the bill. And there's a real focus on plastic single-use food service ware. So 3 key pillars in the bill. First of all, we want to reduce the amount of single-use plastic on the market. We want to ensure that all covered materials that's on the market actually is sustainable. And then we also want to shift the financial burden from taxpayers to producers through EPR that Heidi so well described. So I want to get into each of these in detail, but let me first speak to this, kind of really underscore some of the points that were made about why producers need to take responsibility for this material. It's the producers, in the end of the day, who have the power, they're the ones deciding whether a bottle of shampoo is sold in a bottle that's really recyclable or not. And we had situations where companies were changing the resin type on a detergent bottle, and that one little decision, maybe made for an aesthetic reason, rendered the item entirely non-recyclable, went from fully recyclable to non-recyclable, heading straight to the landfill. And of course, as we all know, they had absolutely no skin in the game, no accountability, no repercussion. And yet we were bearing the cost. When I say we, those of us trying to run local governments, those of us trying to run waste management system. So the other thing is, it's the producers of these bottles who decide whether or not to manufacture the container with cheap virgin plastics or post-consumer resins. And of course, in the end of the day, in nearly every case, the producers are opting for the cheaper option, of course, meaning that there's no market for the recycled material. And so that even if an item then is technically recyclable, if there's no market for the end use of that, for the end product of that recyclable material, it's useless for the item to be technically recyclable. So by requiring producers and by requiring these packaging to achieve high recycling rates, producers have to take action to pursue more sustainable alternatives. And just to give you a little metaphor, here we are in Los Angeles, beautiful Los Angeles, that used to have a major air quality problem. We still do. But there was a day, I grew up, I was born in the 70s. And there was a time in this city where kids were growing up with half of the lung capacity versus kids growing up in rural parts of the country because of how bad our air was. You couldn't see the Hollywood sign because of how terrible the smog was. And we knew that there was a good portion of the automobile industry that was trying to utilize technologies that would lower emissions. But lots of them also were just content with the status quo. A lot of them said, "Hey, we're happy to change if you force us to, but we're not going to do it unless you force us to, government, because we're content with our current cheap model." And ultimately, state government and local government worked with the automobile industry to put in place fair rules around the emissions output of cars. And today we have many more cars on the road, as I experienced trying to get here on time, here in Los Angeles, and yet significantly cleaner air. Every one of you can go out and see the Hollywood sign today, which was not something you could take for granted back before these rules were passed. And so now, not only has that improved air quality here, it actually ended up having an impact globally. Cars are much more efficient and much lower polluting today than they were back then. And so much of it has to do with California's decision to push the industry. And it basically didn't do away with cars. It just forced them to use a more sustainable alternative. And that's ultimately what we're talking about here. This is really about pushing for innovation and incentivizing investment in innovation for the next generation of more sustainable products and packaging. So this bill pushes producers to invest in a robust reuse and refill infrastructure, shift from material types that can't be recycled, meaning those items that are destined for the landfill. When I say cannot be, I mean in real world conditions, not something that's, it doesn't help me if you can recycle it at 1,000 degrees at some lab in Salt Lake City. And we want to see the producers ultimately, there has to be a market built for post-consumer content that will also boost collection efforts, keeping material out of our oceans and our communities. I mean, our goal here ultimately is to create the infrastructure and push companies to make sustainable material so that consumers don't have to think twice. Right now we put it on the backs of the consumers sitting there, with so much going on, their kids screaming at them, they got their boss calling them, and they got to sit here and decide whether this item has to go to the recycling bin or when they're trying to buy milk to go shopping. They're the ones we hold responsible for making sustainable decisions when they have so few tools at their disposal. And so, it's funny, there was a study done that showed that, recycling found that many Americans, found recycling more difficult than building IKEA furniture, doing their taxes, playing the stock market, more difficult than understanding their spouse, was figuring out whether an item was recyclable or not. What are some of the key elements of the bill? Let's talk about our policy pillars. So in order to achieve our policy pillars, we had 4 key components. So one, source reduction, absolutely first in its kind, where we actually set out rules and goals associated with just reducing the amount of plastic crap that's being pushed out onto the system. Number 2, requirement that all material be recyclable or compostable with rates and dates. They got to meet robust rates, and their deadlines to meet those rates. We create the producer responsibility organizations that Heidi talked about. And then there's a fees and funding component that's important too. So let's talk about source reduction. So we have this was the hardest part of the negotiations. It's never been done before. I mean, obviously there have been bans on individual products. So that's, the ultimate source reduction, I suppose. But in terms of put that aside, because remember, we were engaged. Let's remind everybody, this was a situation where there was a ballot measure that had qualified for the ballot. And the question was, are we going to go to ballot? And it's going to be unpredictable. It's going to be incredibly expensive. We win, or it pulled really well initially, but we also knew that industry could spend $100 million and likely defeat it with all sorts of ads that we're currently experiencing ourselves through this election season. And then, by the way, even if they defeat it, we'd all be back to square one again and fighting the same fight over and over and over again, probably with a subpar bill. So this was ultimately the product of a negotiation between the Chamber of Commerce, the local government representatives, and the environmental community, and then experts like Heidi. And so it was very complicated. This, of course, was a really tough issue with the Chamber. The Chamber, in general, said we were not going to agree to anything that involves an explicit product ban, but we are willing to have a conversation with you about aggressive goals that businesses will be held accountable to meeting. And so our source reduction rules are ultimately focused on plastics only. There's a 25% source reduction mandate. 10% of it has to come from reuse, refill, or eliminating plastics. We have these interim targets that you can see here on the slide. And I'm happy to get into some of the details of source reduction if people want to talk more details on that. We also have a major component of the bill relating to sustainable packaging. We spoke a little bit about this. We've got two definitions that are currently in law. One of them was in our SB 343, which said, you can't use the recycling symbol, the chasing arrow symbol, if an item's not actually getting recycled and under the real world conditions. I love reading the newspaper, the physical print newspaper, and it would always show up in a little bag. I don't know why. It never rains in LA. I don't know why they had to put it in a bag, but and I would dutifully, I always thought I was doing the right thing. I would always put it right in the blue bin because it had a recycling symbol. And I thought, oh, it's recyclable. I'm supposed to put it in the blue bin. Well, turns out I found out once I went down this rabbit hole with Heidi on waste, which you're all involved in. I found out actually those plastic bags are the worst thing you could do. In fact, it makes it harder for us to recycle all the paper because those plastic film ends up getting caught up in the paper bales and actually reduces the quality of our paper bales. It makes it harder. So in trying to do the right thing, because I was following instructions, I thought I was harming the system. And so one of the things we did with SB 343 said, you can't use the recycling symbol if the item's not actually recyclable under real world conditions, if it's not getting recycled. So that's one thing. We also have a definition under AB 1201, it was Assemblymember Ting's bill from a little while back that created a similar definition for composting. I don't care if you want to cook your items under special conditions and it's compostable under some perfect lab somewhere, great. But if it's not compostable, in real life, we don't want those items in the composting bin. So we have these rules relating to compostability, recyclability, and aggressive rates, so that by 2032 they've got to meet 65% recycling and composting rates. PRO, the Producer Responsibility Organization. So what are we going to do with this? Well, first of all, there's going to be the Pangea PRO that will start. Everyone will be part of it. It's going to be one big happy family, and then over time, there will be new PROs that will sprout up. This was controversial with the environmental community. A lot of people in the environmental community were very afraid of giving business too much control over the process. The logic here ultimately is it's business that knows their products best, business knows their market best, business knows their consumers best. And so they can and must and should play a really important role in helping to develop the path forward. However, we also need to give government a lot of power to hold business accountable to meeting the various aggressive rates and dates. And that was the ultimate, that was the key tension. And ultimately the goal of our bill was to create enough flexibility for business to lead the way toward innovation, but enough teeth from the governmental regulators so as to truly hold them accountable. And there's all sorts of accountability mechanisms put in place. CalRecycle, which is the department that oversees this area, is given a lot of power over approval of the PRO plans. And there's an advisory council and there's annual reports, and the budget has to cover the costs to comply and fully cover costs of local government and haulers. And so there's a lot of enforcement mechanisms that are put into the bill. We also have enforcement and accountability. There are penalties, very, very steep penalties, $50,000 per day, per violation, per product, if based on a product line. So, the department has discretion, of course, to set the violation amount. But ultimately, it's not about trying to penalize people if we can get people into compliance. And so there's also a mechanism for a corrective action plan to get people on the right path. There's a mechanism for the CalRecycle to revoke a PRO for being out of compliance. But as I say, the focus can and must ultimately be about trying to get people to compliance.
Can I understand?
Yeah.
Is that the revoking of the PRO? That's never been done anywhere in the world that I know of. But this gives CalRecycle the ability to literally say, you can't control this program anymore, you're messing it up.
Yep.
And that was a big relief to a lot of environmentalists. So I just want to highlight that because that was first, I think, in the world.
And this is one of the problems we've seen with some other programs. And so what we were able to learn from the mistakes of some of the past programs and give this program more strength. This is another important thing. There's a lot of money that's going to be generated under this bill. So along with the expected PRO fees to cover the cost of the program and the eco-modulated fees that cover material recovery, eco-modulation says you pay more for an item that is less environmentally friendly. You pay less if you're putting products out that are more environmentally friendly. We also have a mitigation fee that's built into the bill. Plastic covered material will pay a surcharge into a California plastic pollution mitigation fund. It's going to generate $500 million a year for 10 years, $5 billion. And this money is going to go toward mitigating the environmental and public health impacts of plastic. It's going to be appropriated through the legislature for investments in environmental health programs and projects. And a significant, a majority of the money, 60%, is specifically earmarked to benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities, because I think we're so aware of what a serious environmental justice issue is at play with regards to plastic pollution and also plastic production. So we are very proud of the work that we got done. Ultimately, of course, from my perspective, success will be measured by whether we can export this model. I said every step of the way during this process that I would consider this entire thing to be a failure if we just do this here in California and nobody else adopts a similar program. But I will say, it really is getting that international attention. I mean, on the day that it was passed, I had friends who were at the UN Oceans Conference in Portugal. And apparently a cheer erupted at the conference in Portugal when they all got their little alerts on their phone saying that the bill had passed in California, because all of them had been watching this so closely because they're of course oceans people and were very concerned about plastics pollution. But we are already, and I've talked to Heidi about this, we're already getting calls from these wonderful innovators who have been pioneering the next generation of more environmentally sustainable products and packaging that were unfortunately not getting called back quite as quickly from the big dog distributors and producers in the past, not because they didn't think those products were good, but just because they didn't have to call them. Now they have to call them. Now they got to start engaging with these folks that are ready to roll with the next generation of more sustainable products and packaging. And it's immensely exciting. We're excited about the bill. We also know that there's a lot of work ahead for accountability, to make sure it's well implemented, to make sure we work through kinks, because it's a long bill. There's a lot of complexity to it. But I hope that we all be able to work together to make sure this program is successful and that it makes a real difference globally on this enormous environmental and financial problem. So really appreciate your time and attention and interest in this important issue.
Oh, sorry. You're gonna moderate us?
Oh, and
Yeah.
I do want to give a shout out, and I do this all the time, but she deserves it. Tina Andolina, my wonderful staffer, who's listening in from Sacramento, who was jockeying this negotiation every step of the way. An extraordinary public servant, and I'm so lucky to have her on my team, and was mine and Heidi's partner in crime as we got this thing through.
So we'll give a big hand for Tina. Okay, if you're watching us on Zoom, and we know that several of you are, just on the bottom of your screen, there's question and answer. So please type your question and we will do our best to get the answer for it before the end of the session. We're also gonna have microphones in here. So if you have any questions, please, raise your hand and we'll start. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, and congratulations on such great work. How was the eco moderation fee? Did I get that right?
Modulation.
Modulation,
Yeah.
sorry. How is that determined?
Well, the bill outlines a few things that have to be looked at, but ultimately the producer-run organization is going to decide based on the criteria in the bill, things like I said, recyclability, compostability, is it a contaminant? Can it be sold? Is there a market for it? All those kinds of things will all be weighed in. And they'll come up with a proposed formula and Cal Recycle will have to approve it. And then when their plan is approved with that formula in it, they'll go back and they'll charge the producers. Yeah. Uh-oh, we confused them.
Over here.
Hi, Judy Sheehan with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I'm the chief lobbyist for the Conference of Mayors on Environmental Policy. Oh my God, congratulations. That is not easy.
Can we, I mean, seriously, $500 million a year for 10 years to clean up California. And we should say that the ballot measure really was the backdrop on that.
Totally.
If we hadn't had the ballot measure hanging over the heads of the industry, I don't think we could have ever gotten that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked on brownfields and financial capability and integrated planning. It takes 9 years usually, and that's just nonstop beating your head up against the wall. So once again, congratulations. Recommendations, taking this nationwide. I mean, I think a lot of people will be looking at you guys and saying, does it work? Does it not work? What are the pros? What are the cons before they're going to go to that national level? But I'd be just curious as to your thoughts as to how do we tackle this, especially given, and I'm also kind of curious as to what like the single-use plastic people are responding back to you regarding alternatives.
Well, the single-use plastic people regarding alternatives, you mean chemical recycling?
Just alternative packaging. Yeah.
Oh,
How are they seeing the future?
why don't you answer that one then? Because I don't totally get the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're operating from the assumption that they're going to see this antagonistically. Now,
Oh, the producers. of single-use plastic.
Now, let me say, I mean, producers were at the negotiating table and they were a part of this deal. So that's the beauty of this story, right? It actually had the sign off from the Chamber of Commerce and their members. You know, it turns out that plastic water bottles are actually the one success story with regards to recyclability and the biggest success story with regards to recyclability in the plastic space. Though, of course, you know, California, I think we're at about a 70% recycling rate. It could be, they know it could be in the 90s. A lot of states at 35%. There's so much room to grow, but there's no infrastructure, there's no incentive, there's no accountability associated with the collection. But we know how recyclable it is if we can actually figure out a way to collect it and make sure it's sorted and then turn it into new products. I think ultimately the beauty here is that we're not, you know, we're not doing away with packaging. We're not doing away with these kinds of products. We're just saying you got to move to a more sustainable model. So it doesn't put anybody out of business. You know, and I bring up the automobile example, you know, again, to make the point that it's not like the car companies, you know, stop producing cars. They just produce better burning cars, lower polluting cars. That's what we're asking, you know, the industry to do here, is to finally have some accountability associated with the end use of their products and to move toward, you know, greater sustainability. I mean, there's certainly some in the industry that want to drag their knuckles and not make changes, but there's also lots that are actually kind of agnostic with regards to how they produce their products. They're going to comply with the law. And I guess one of the beauties of working in California is that we're so big. I think we're about to become the 4th largest economy in the world on our own. You know, it was such a big economy that now, I mean, most of these folks are saying, hey, you know, I'm going to have to comply with California law. They're such a big player. And so we're just going to comply with California, and that's going to, you know, define our national work. It doesn't always work out that way. And we're certainly seeing battles right now over, you know, the Clean Air Act and automobile manufacturing and all that kind of thing in certain states. But at least some of the indication we're seeing right now, and I know we were talking to some distributors, work with Walmart, for example. I mean, a lot of these big companies, they'll have one major distribution center on the West Coast and one major one on the East Coast. They think, you know what, we're just going to, you know, make it all the same and just comply with California. And that's what we're starting to hear. But I know you've had some conversations that might shed some light on
Yeah,
this.
and I'm sorry, I thought you were talking, there's a group called Ban Single-Use Plastic, and I thought you were talking about the advocates, not the producers. That's why I got confused. And I did want to talk about the whole national situation, because I'm working nationally, And we're frustrated just trying to get a discussion about a national bottle bill. And we have 40 states that don't have a bottle bill and 10 states that do that. Some of them have had it for almost 30 years. I was in Michigan in high school when they passed the 10 cent, and how they did that. And it's working great and it cleaned everything up. But here we are and we still have 40 states and we've still got Indorama and others importing plastic from other countries
Right.
because it's getting landfilled right down the street in the landfill outside of Dallas. That's crazy. So they're all starting to lobby the industry and wanting the stuff back. We've got to get the infrastructure built. And I thought the best thing is to start with a national deposit bottle bill and then later stand up an EPR program after we shake out for a few years how these bills are working and see, what's cherry pick, figure out what's working best and try to harmonize with the industry. But I think because we are going to surpass Germany quickly and be the 4th biggest economy in the world, it matters a lot what we do here. It's the reason I work in Sacramento and not another state. So hopefully, I think the discussions are going to start. I've actually just talked to the World Wildlife Fund yesterday. They've got a working group that they're working on. I'm going to be part of that. And we're all talking about EPR, DRS. When do we bring it national? How does that look? There are companies that sell beverage containers mostly and some packaging, and they would prefer that the EPR be for everything and not have a separate deposit because that way they can share the costs with more manufacturers and they're not paying as much for their bottles. So we've got that problem going on. So there's going to be some tension, but the discussions are happening. I'm in some groups on that. And I do want to say that my organization has started an EPR or a SB 54 implementation working group. If you would like to join us, please let me know. And also I forgot to point out my board member, Michael Simpson here from the city of Los Angeles. So you're welcome to also say hi to Michael and talk to us. We have a C3 and a C4 and he's on the C4 board because we really need to get everybody at the table to have big, deep discussions about all the different aspects of this bill. If we wait, I've done regulations in the state for 32 years. If we start, everybody goes in there and just starts throwing at CalRecycle, I want this, I want that, I want that, and they don't understand the other stakeholders' perspectives, it's going to take forever and we're not going to get a great process. It's going to be too combative. So we're trying to get a lot of this shaken out and discussed behind the scenes, and people can have their ultimate, lobbying in their positions, but that's something I'm doing, trying to help facilitate this and help people understand each other. That's the way we got the bill.
Yep. Right.
Jessica.
Hey there. Hey, Jessica.
Because you're about to go down that road already. I wanted to ask you a question, Heidi, and to you, Senator Ben Allen. Does the definition of a product's recyclability include their acceptability into chemical recycling?
Well, that is the big fun question, isn't it? So I was chair of the Recycling Commission for 2 years. We had more in California, and we had more kerfuffle over this issue than anything else. And here's what I kept saying from the dais. What are we talking about? I'm swinging at a ghost. What is chemical recycling? There is no definition. I've heard it called chemical recycling, advanced recycling, molecular recycling. What is it tomorrow? I need to know the feedstock, the emissions, and the output in order to determine if it's recycling at all. And CalRecycle, we have no definition. So I've told, this is a big deal and a big discussion that's going to partially be, I think, hammered out in the regs because they have authority to say no to putting money into a program or a facility that is not what they deem recycling. That's a big hammer. So I encourage everybody to be at the table and be part of this discussion.
But we did, this became a sticking point with the environmental justice community as the bill was reaching its the finish line. And we did put in some language relating to this, at their request to really, I think, really zero in on what their core concerns are, which are that we not have this bill not do anything to promote, encourage, expand, certain types of chemical recycling processes that will increase pollution in frontline communities.
Yep.
And so there's really strong language in there about that, and that was a tough sticking point at the end.
And so recycling is not combustion, incineration. It can be not anaerobic digestion is not considered, but then there was like 4 in the definition. So paralysis. So there are things they cannot do and call it recycling.
So the kinds of chemical recycling that the EJ community is most concerned about are prohibited definitionally in our bill.
Yep.
Yep, back here.
What an honor. Thank you first, both of you, for the amazing endless amount of hours that go into passing this kind of legislation and for your leadership. My question is for you, Senator Allen, as I listen to you speak as such a well-spoken and articulate advocate for our sector, I am wondering how we build similar legislative support in our communities. If you have advice on how you became such a great recycling expert that we can replicate in our states.
Well, thank you for the question. It's not something that I knew much about when I first ran for office. And I did not come from a city council. I came from a school board. So I didn't even have the kind of familiarity that so many council members have because they oftentimes work on these waste issues. So I guess what I would say, so Heidi talked about CFI. There are organizations in states that focus on trying to educate members in a fun, interesting, but ultimately very informative way about tough issues like this. And I think just bringing legislators to see a dump, to see a MRF, to see a recycling center is actually a powerful experience. It's not the kind of thing that's easy to convince someone to do the first time, but once they go, they thought, wow, I'm really glad I came here, because it just focuses the mind on these issues in a way that a PowerPoint simply can't. I do think that making sure that your city council, so many members of the legislature end up coming out of city councils. And of course, so much of the key work that happens with regards to waste management is happening at the city level, obviously. So making sure your council members are up to speed, aware of the issues, communicating with their legislators about this. So you think about who is most likely to run for the legislature, and make sure they're, before they run, you're getting them, bringing them down to educate them, to make sure they know about this stuff, to make sure they're aware. Because in the end of the day, once you get into the legislature, it's hard to, it's drinking from a fire hose. You're working on a gazillion different issues, and it really is hard to focus. So it's about reaching out, targeting, and then working with counterparts and I think part of what we've been able to do with CFI is we've been able to bring together people from the waste hauler industry, from local government, from the environmental community, but then also robotics folks and Amazon shows up, and plastics producers and glass. We got the wine industry involved because they care about waste management. There's lots of different industries that care a ton about this stuff, and they all have a role to play. We get everyone together and we go on these tours to learn more together, and they're really interesting. And I the more I went, the deeper I got into this rabbit hole, and I just found it increasingly fascinating. Especially since for me, there was so much low-hanging fruit here. This is something that a lot of people don't typically pay attention to. And I guess one thing I will say is you don't need every member of the legislature to be passionate about this issue. But it's good. You need to have a few people in your legislature who are up to speed, who are really into it. And I think part of what we had here is that we worked hard to reach out to engage a couple key Republicans, a couple key moderate Democrats, folks from different parts, ideological subcultures and subclimates, I guess, of our legislature. And we brought them on the trips, and they then became important educators in their own groups, because they were people that these different groups trusted. Maybe there was one that was from the Central Valley who had a lot of credibility with the agricultural industry and the agriculture areas, or a Republican, or someone who was kind of a more business Dem. So those people played an important role ultimately in convincing their colleagues that this was important for us to do. And we identified them, got them involved, educated them, answered every single question they had. And it took them a while. A couple of them, one of them, quite frankly, I'll never forget this. He had not supported our earlier efforts. He came on a trip and he was able to talk directly to industry right at a site, realized that he had been explicitly lied to,
by lobbyists for certain folks that were trying to kill our previous bills. And that angered him so much that he'd been, kind of spun in such an incorrect direction that he really got motivated to get involved and help us. And that education process ended up being really important because he ended up, he was a very trusted person within a group of legislators, and his support and engagement in the bill ultimately was very helpful in our getting it across the finish line.
And I think it's important to remember that, waste management is usually one of the top 3 costs for local government. So getting your local government associations to make that clear, getting, as Senator Allen said, getting them to your facilities. They don't understand them. Most people don't understand their utilities. So it's important to get them to see it and do it locally, develop those relationships so that the first call that they make when they have questions is to you, not to a lobbyist representing the opposition. And I've seen it too many times. I have a great lobbyist, they're out there, but they get paid a lot of money to fight. And they don't necessarily bring back the message you might want to the other side. When I'm putting out an olive branch, I find out later they were told, oh, fight them. They're terrible. They're going to hurt you, blah, blah, blah. So you have to bring people together in a place that there's no bill to fight over first and develop relationships and trust. And then that really does get into the bills and you'll get more.
And I would just say in general, cities have to figure out how to be more sophisticated in engaging in the legislative process writ large. I know it's hard because you're working with one hand tied behind your back because you can't make political contributions. You don't oftentimes have the lobbyist firepower, though you can hire lobbyists and don't hesitate to do so when you need to. But at the end of the day, the legislators represent your folks, right? You've got one of the most important causes out there. In the end of the day, you're the ones that are doing the work that makes a difference with regards to the quality of life for their constituents. Are you balancing your budget so you can cover programs for seniors and first responders and parks, or are you able to collect the trash? Are you able to manage the system in an efficient, cost-effective manner or not? And whether you or not you're able to really is such a kind of a fundamental quality of life issue for the legislators' constituents. And yet Heidi's right. There's an infrastructure in place whereby outside interest groups are oftentimes first in line to get in front of the legislators, and they're the ones that are trying to educate the legislators. You got to, but here's what I'll say. As I say, most of these legislators oftentimes come out of local government themselves, and they can and do care about what their local cities care about. But you have to make sure that you're pushing it higher up on your agenda. You have to make sure that your city councils and your mayors are prioritizing this issue. And this issue is being brought up when they go have their meetings with legislators. That this is brought up when legislators are running for office for the first time. And I know that's sometimes hard for, you guys are working so hard trying to just do the work, within the system. But you got to be savvy about the political process and try to think about ways to build your power, your persuasive power, because that's an important part of this story.
Now, I would say on SB 343, the haulers helped us get that bill over the line. The waste haulers were critical. So make sure your waste haulers are there when you do the tour, and you develop relationships and they develop relationships, because I remember it was Devin Mathis. It was he got up on the floor and we didn't even know he would support the bill. And he got up there and he made the closing speech, and he's the Republican that we didn't even know supported. But Waste Management or Republic Services, Mark Brea was talking to him right there live on the floor and convinced them, hey, we're going to have to raise your rates if we don't get the contamination down. We need to get this chasing arrow off the non-recyclables. And it made total business sense to him. And he went right out there and he was our closer. And we didn't expect that.
Well, you talked to him off the floor.
Off the floor.
Legally off the floor.
Yeah. Legally off the floor. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
But no, but it's a good point. I mean, there are many instances where there will be a powerful business group or labor union that share your agenda on a particular issue, and you should take advantage of that as well, because those folks oftentimes have access.
Yep.
And so the combined power of their lobbying, but your persuasive power as a representative of local government can have a multiplier effect.
And join groups like mine, because I can do stuff that you guys sometimes can't.
Well, I'm sorry, Juby, you want to say something? Oh, I want to thank you, Senator Ben Allen. Your passion filled up the room. So thank you. And thank you, Heidi, for being here. And let's give them a great round of applause.